What's up, coin traders? Thanks for joining me for the show looking at Aptos APT on that ticker. One of the big L1 names that we are looking at that has been kind of in the spotlight recently and coming in at a very nice top right now. We're looking at a trend high for 1948 for Aptos APT. Quick sell-off though, so just like we always see, and you might have heard the phrase before, stairs or the escalator up and the elevator down, this kind of does apply to what we see. So even looking on the weekly, you can see just obviously 2 weeks of huge sell-off. And notably about this too, not necessarily even that much bearish volume to see on this big retracement. So did have a pretty long lower shadow on this, but the body still completely engulfs the lower shadow. So we do have a lot of strength in that weekly move. But right at the close, we did see bulls be able to defend close on top this 50-period EMA. So not necessarily an awful sign, it's pretty good sign still, but obviously now with an inside bar forming, and it is easy for a weekly inside bar to form just based on the magnitude. So you can see upper limit for trading was right around 1450 and obviously down to a low about 750. So huge opportunity for retracement. So you can see just how big this body was, even percentage wise, was almost a 50% pullback just on one weekly bar. So the point here is that plenty of room now for a weekly inside bar to come in, which is pretty much what we're expecting. And obviously next week as well. But like we said, plenty of room both to the upside and the downside to actually see price trading ranges and still be within the range of the previous weekly candle. Now, Aptos is still a pretty relatively new project, so not a ton of price data overall on this chart. So don't have a ton of things to look at, but we do still have plenty to look at regarding especially this weekly chart and also some previous supports. So right now, big area of previous price trading that we have been looking at, which is where Aptos sat. Pretty much we were looking from about the $7, almost $8 range, all the way up to about $9.75 and the $10 psychological mark. So if we do want to put a price level line right at the $10 psychological mark, just above it, but you get the picture. Then zooming out, plenty of things to look at because plenty of support, resistance, big resistance. And then now, unfortunately, didn't even hold up this level just because we did have so much downside momentum or lack of buying rather, because like we talked about, not necessarily that much selling pressure coming in compared to the amount of buying pressure that it actually took to run up this whole level to put in our new current trend high, which is still shy of the current all-time high right now, which does sit at 2039. So being that we are at 1948, not too far, but we do have plenty of resistance points up overhead. And so we're looking at a bunch. And for the close, we would be looking at 1707 all the way up to about 1836, coming in at the trend high of 1949. And then all the way up to about 2039. So big points, obviously, of resistance. And that's why when we see charts like this that pretty much just go straight up, we do know that they do likely come straight down and they don't get time to actually establish a lot of resistive points. And that's why we do have these massive zones where prices just kind of get pretty crazy in that point. Obviously, extremely far away from hitting those all-time highs right now, being that we are below the $10 level. So even to the current trend high, 110% gain, all-time high about 120. So we'd be looking just up above that for price discovery and a blue sky breakout right now. But like we mentioned, looking left, do have a lot of analysis to talk about, especially with these EMAs, because these weekly EMAs were actually extremely efficient because we saw rejection from this 26 period. We saw plenty of resistance from the 12 period. We saw big support coming in on the 12 period this whole move, and especially after resistance on the 50, once it started to form, we did know that we held it and flipped it as this very nice supportive point before finally finding support continue along the 12 period EMA, pushing prices up to the current trend high. So a very nice looking setup, especially coming off the low right now for the trend, which was at 470. So obviously now being back at these previous price trading levels that we were stuck at for so long and found resistance points at before isn't necessarily the best sign, because we were hoping to find a little bit of support on top of this level, especially after such a big retracement. So from the current trend high about 1950 down to the low at about 730, we were looking at a retracement of about 62%, which is actually one of the biggest of the big name altcoins right now, since most are down 40 to 50. 60% is kind of the upper range of what we see for a pullback. So Definitely huge pullback, especially after so much increasing bullish volume. So even starting down in the fall, when we had almost no volume, just continuous increasing, had a period of a taper off, but then huge increasing bullish volume once again, just showing how strong this overall trend is. So to see this much of a pullback and retracement is kind of unfortunate, but we also know that it is setting up for a much greater bullish move this cycle anyway. So got a Fibonacci pulled up right now from the fall lows where we were looking at prices down at 470 up to the current trend high. So right now, seeing prices reject and pull back in about 2 weeks from that level, kicking off the 78.6, which right now is at 787. So we can't see how applied this Fibonacci is though, because like we talked about, all of this inside trading for the amount of time basically we're looking at from the end of last year in 2023 through about the start of February. So that's kind of going to be one of the sideways times that we look at, and obviously stuck up in between 61.8 and 78.6. So hopefully we don't get stuck up at this level once again for another couple months, but it's not impossible to see if we do start to just sit sideways before seeing another leg up. This has been a crypto pattern that we have seen before. So ultimately we would love to establish supports and obviously maintain support as well on top of the 78.6. So even on the previous trading, especially when we look at it from November, you can see that we were looking at resistance coming in on the 78.6. We're also looking at then flipping it as support, flipping it as support. So finding it as support now again shows just how much this is a very relevant level. And in fact, the cool thing about this too is that we can actually extend this chart all the way over, and you can just see how it applies to some of the previous levels. So if we do look left here, looking at big points of resistance and then big points of support. So even though we didn't necessarily establish it based on a low and a high at that point, we know that this level at about 787 is going to be extremely relevant. Obviously, now hoping that we don't see prices retrace and kick off this level once again, but we do have that big level as support to the downside, which also still would maintain inside bars on this weekly chart. So wanted to flip over into the 4-day chart now, and specifically want to turn off the 50-period exponential moving average, just because if we look at the 12 and the 26, you can see that on this chart, 12 and 26 have been extremely effective guides and kind of showing what this overall trend is doing. So even starting back after we had our start of 2023 rally, had a little pullback, but still found support. And then meanwhile, had a lot of rejection in between this zone between 26 and the 12-period EMA. And then obviously after the fall breakout, we did flip this bullish, had our nice bullish cross, and then ultimately end up maintaining very nice support, especially you can see all these lower shadows here, maintaining a lot of support on top of 26 and specifically in between this zone. So to be able to see the bears just with not necessarily that much bearish volume, but obviously we had a lot of other catalysts in the rest of the crypto space. So we were due for a pullback on Aptos, but maybe not necessarily this much. And so right now you can see how just in the course of a couple of candles lost this support, and now we are starting to tighten the gap in a bearish formation where it does look like we will be forming a bearish cross. Typically, once that happens again, we're probably going to expect a little bit more resistance in between the 12 and 26 again to the downside direction. So specifically, if we want to talk about an actual price level support, we're looking right about the $11 level. So if we look to the left, big period of support that matched up with the 26, found it as a big period of resistance. And then right now, if we actually look at what these EMAs are probably going to do, they'll probably intersect right around the time that we have maybe a little bit of an oversold bounce. So this is going to be one of our big upside resistance levels, especially if we do have continuous decreasing bullish volume come in, kind of like what we've seen thus far right now. Big period right now for support is going to be right at the 850 level for closes on this 4-day chart. So we're looking at currently still being able to maintain a close on top of 850. Also extreme amount of support coming in for this level before rallying up to our current trend high. Previously, before that, we were looking at resistance and then big points of resistance again. So this is definitely a proven and tested point of support right now based on previous technicals. So hopefully we will be able to see this maintain a little bit more of that, especially as we do try to trend up to this $11 mark on this type of oversold bounce. So even looking at a Fibonacci retracement from the high down to the low, What we would actually want to see is a return in retracement, especially if we do get an oversold bounce up to the 38.2, which is 1197 right now. Like we mentioned, that will intersect with these EMAs. So realistically, I would expect it to get a little bit lower. So that's why probably about the $11 mark is our technical mark that we're going to be expecting based on what the EMAs and previous price levels are doing right now. And especially given so far how much below these EMAs we actually are right now. So even on an upside bounce move, we would still be looking at about 17% to the $11 level, almost 18, almost to 20, and then even up to potentially that 1180 mark, we would be looking at 27%. So still plenty of gain to the upside. Obviously from current price points to the current trend high over 100% like we talked about. So plenty of upside if you did want to buy this dip. But right now, structure's not setting up for the most bullishes of time here in the short period anyway. So do have plenty of time for this chart to actually establish what it is going to be doing. But right now, especially after most crypto has retraced so much, not necessarily thinking that we're going to be in the most bullishes of rallies here coming up ahead. Got the VPVR turned on, volume profile, visible range. You can see that we are pretty much in the center of mass right now for this chart, starting at about $7, running all the way up until about the 1035 level. So plenty of opportunity for prices to sit here. It would take a lot of motion to actually see the price continue lower, especially based on the amount of retracement so far, as well as where the supports are coming in, and based on kind of this minimal amount of bearish volume that we have seen. Despite pushing it back about 60%, I don't necessarily see that sustaining too much more to push it down below those levels of support. Okay, so I do want to flip over here into the daily chart now for Aptos. And as you can see, we're getting a little bit more bullish pressure on the current daily candle, but obviously not that much bullish volume has been coming in. So we're not necessarily looking at the strongest of retracements and reversals coming in right now. So this could ultimately end up looking like a flag type pattern, kind of like what we've seen already, getting rejected from the EMAs and then being on our way back down again. But I do suspect that there is a lot of support right now. So like we talked about, we could be looking at a small upside, maybe pulling back, setting a higher low, but ultimately nothing necessarily that major coming in right now for this chart. Another thing I want to talk about right now, pulling up the technical, specifically the RSI right now, and a little bit of the stochastic RSI. Zooming out, just want to point out how obviously we did hit oversold levels. In fact, we did get down to 25.20, so pretty far below the 30 line here, indicating a lot of oversold pressure. Last time we actually got below that was before the fall rally even started back in September. So obviously that did mark almost our bottom before actually seeing the next leg of upside. So since we have been in a very strong bullish uptrend, this level of pullback and this type of indication of being oversold is usually a pretty good strong indication of being at that lower supportive level. So we could see even just a little bit lower, but we're not expecting a little bit, or excuse me, like about a 60% or even more from here to see new all-time lows. So that's kind of why we do rely on this indicator in strong bullish uptrends a little bit more than we do in a bearish downtrends, because they do prove to be a little bit more reliable when we do have strong moves to the upside and we do get oversold. So that is why we look at this as kind of being another eye, especially with a lot of the lower supports that we have hit, thinking that probably we are going to be ish around the bottom of what we experienced. But like we said, plenty of upside resistance to pull up and test, and it probably will take some time now to actually change this trend. And like we said, not necessarily expecting an immediate bounce and reversal, but we are going to expect more or less about bottom prices to be kind of about in right now. And like we said, that doesn't necessarily mean they can't go any lower than they are currently. But based on the amount of retracement so far, wouldn't expect too much more and the lower supports to ultimately end up holding up. So same thing looking down here at the stochastic RSI. So we're looking at a little bit of this W-shaped bottom so far, coming in especially below the 20 line. So that's pretty significant. Also heading back to the upside. So haven't really seen this happen and play out. In fact, the last time we have seen kind of about a little bit one of these W patterns, and this was a little bit of a bigger one, actually was back here coming in at the start of the year. And then obviously on our second bounce did have our low and confirm the next rally after that. So are expecting a little bit more upside pressure based on these technicals. Would expect that to be coming in, but then obviously I think we are going to experience a little bit more resistance up overhead And yeah, longer term consolidation here pretty much is what we are going to be anticipating. So yeah, with that actually is going to go ahead and wrap up our video on Aptos APT on that ticker. Hope you all enjoyed. If you did, please hit the thumbs up, like, and subscribe if you have not done so just yet. Also, drop me a note down in the comment sections below for any issues, questions, comments, disagreements, all that stuff. Looking forward to getting back to you. Drop me a follow over on Twitter or X at @coin_trades is the handle. Looking forward to chatting with everyone over there. But otherwise, do appreciate all the continued love and support, as always does mean so much. Stay safe, take care, and I'll catch you back in the next video.